This is some serious stuff because the President of the United States, and this president specifically, President Biden, I fear, could walk us down right into this path. He says specifically that we have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962. I don't think there's any such a thing as the ability to use a tactical nuclear weapon and not end up with Armageddon. So we're telling the Russians, let me go to Wes Smith right away. Wes, I mean, that seems like a message to Putin, not like a threat, but more like, listen, if you do this, we're going to mutually assured destruction. The world will end.
He is implying that the use of a tactical nuclear weapon by Russia in Ukraine will result in a nuclear response by the United States. That is the implication of what he's saying, that we will go to that escalation.
The whole team he has around, the Jake Sullivans of the world, they weren't good with dealing with Iran. That's not a country that has the weapons yet. So, dealing with Russia, I don't think they know how to deal with Putin himself, the strategy in place. I think they're a bit trigger happy, to be honest with you.
When Biden says things like he did last night, I worry about this geriatric president having the nuclear codes, because the White House about twice a week has to come out and walk back what President Biden has said. You can't walk back the launch of a nuclear missile.
These remarks were both odd in terms of where they were made, how they were made, and exactly what he said. No, it's certainly not the only option. And for a president of the United States to use that language, frankly, it's seemingly kind of just wandering randomly in front of a group of donors is deeply dangerous. That's not been reported. Vladimir Putin certainly read that. Those around Vladimir Putin have read that. Leaders around the world have read that our president's talking about that in this way. He's the president of the United States of America. To say that there's no other option, that he's a passive victim of this, is deeply dangerous and frankly reflective of the weak Biden foreign policy for the first 20 months of their administration. No, there are many other ways this can proceed, but most importantly, there's a lot of work to do today to make sure that Vladimir Putin doesn't use that nuclear weapon.
Supposedly they've communicated to the Russians. I guess there's one diplomatic channel. They've said this is what would happen if you do this, but then he goes to this group of donors. To your point, I mean, if he honestly believes this, and his team believes this is where we could be potentially heading, don't you think he should be addressing all of us right now? Like right now, this minute? I mean, if this is how serious it is.
If he means that, he doesn't need to be telling Democratic donors in a private residence in New York City, which is where it took place. You need to go on television tonight from the Oval Office and tell people the threat we're up against. If he does not believe that, he never, ever should say anything like this.
If President Biden believes that this is the precipice that we sit on and that there is very little that the United States can do to prevent it from going badly, and that the ramifications are as deep and as troubling and as unavoidable as he described, he should have been on TV the moment he came to believe that, speaking to the nation, speaking to the world about the seriousness of the moment that we are in. But frankly, I think this was just another example of President Biden just off the cuff, just kind of wandering around, just speaking just extemporaneously, saying things that no president has said in a fundraising event who didn't say it, at least from the White House podium, but more importantly, to your point, to the nation from the Oval Office in an evening presentation in the way that every serious event has been handled by every president of the United States for decades and decades.
Going to war in Iraq versus Saddam Hussein, going to war versus the Taliban in Afghanistan is a whole lot different, West, than going to war with Russia. And it's not about, I'm not talking about their battlefield. If you put our troops versus their troops, we win easily. But that's not what we're talking. That is not the reality of what this war. And that's what President Biden's not trying to. If he believes this, he's also not hiding that. I think what he's saying is, yeah, they may not be great on the battlefield, which is what he said, but they've got the weapons to, lead us to Armageddon.
This one impacts every American and every person in the world. This is dangerous loose talk. This is far more than a gaffe, And when you are the commander-in-chief of the most powerful military in the history of the world, we expect you to be measured, to be judicious, and to, at some point, project strength and yet keep your enemy guessing. And he seems incapable of doing that.
Yes, Vladimir Putin took the step to start a war of aggression that was wrong. But to escalate to this point, to nuclear Armageddon, is a failure of diplomacy, a failure of leadership, a failure of international institutions like the UN and the Security Council, like NATO to some extent. If the only other option, if someone takes this bad action, is destruction of everyone in the world, you're not protecting. You would think with all these, Ivy League educated advisors, they'd have some better strategy